Good morning. So I'm Jeff Autenrieth. I'm the soil conservationist for the NRCS in Autenrieth, and we're here today at a jack pine plantation that the DNR planted about 7 years ago. And before I came to the NRCS, I worked for the DNR Wildlife Division planting jack pine for the Kirtland's Warbler habitat, which is this stuff here. This is a younger plantation as far as habitat goes. At about 7 years, the Kirtland's Warbler, which is an endangered, not endangered anymore, but it is a threatened warbler that only nests in northern Michigan, parts of Wisconsin, and Ontario, and winters in the Bahamas. They do all of their breeding here in the jack pine plantations like this. So 7 years, a 7-year-old plantation is early for them to be occupying, but it's about when they start nesting. They're ground nesters, so they do nest on the ground underneath the jack pine. And this effort to plant these very large jack pine plantations of 200 acres or more, this particular one is about 700 acres total, which are pretty common for this area in northern Michigan. That effort has brought the Kirtland's Warbler population from about 200 birds to well over 3,000 birds now. So it's one of the only very few species that have ever had a federally designated recovery team made up of several different interested parties around that particular species that has ever gone from a recovery team to a conservation team. It's very rare for that to happen, and this is a huge success story for the state of Michigan, the DNR, and the Forest Service that work cooperatively here. So this habitat's very important not only for the Kirtland's Warbler, but we're also very close to the Au River, which is a very important watershed for northern Michigan. A lot of anglers frequently use the Au and the other tributaries for fishing. It's one of the most famous blue ribbon trout streams in the nation, and this is where the water from that, or for that watershed, comes from. So they get the rain and the snow here in the jack pine plains, and that water moves from this area down to, like I said, tributaries and into the river. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the habitat and the silviculture and that kind of thing as far as the jack pine goes. So jack pine is a fire-dependent species. It has serotinous cones which require heat to open them, and typically in the way it naturally regenerated was through fire, and we can't be having large fires on the landscape anymore for human and property safety and protection. So the way we mimic those fires is through timber harvesting, which was typically a clear cut, and a replanting exercise. So the way typically we've been doing that for the last 70 years or so has been to do a clear cut, use a machine to create a furrow in the ground, and then in the early 50s we were doing mechanical planting. So it was pulled with a machine that somebody sat on the planter and individually placed each tree in the ground. Now there's a different operation that's a little bit more efficient, where we have a machine that puts the furrow in the ground, and then we use hand planters to come back, and they will plant the trees in the furrows at a later time. And they typically plant about 9,000 trees an acre per planter per day. And this year alone, they planted 6,000 acres in 3 weeks with a crew of 50 planters, which is amazing and quite the undertaking for getting this stuff reestablished. So, like I mentioned before, when the trees get to about 7 years of age is when they really get into optimum habitat. The negative thing as far as silviculture and forestry goes is once the trees get to about 20 years of age, they fall out of effective habitat. So the birds leave them, and we're left with very highly densely planted jack pine, which doesn't have a huge monetary value anyway. And having that huge, thick, dense plantation, the trees don't get an opportunity to express themselves and really grow into a merchantable piece of lumber. So it's a struggle. Economically, the cost of planting is very expensive. It's around $300 an acre to get them planted, and timber sales in the last 5 years have only sold for about $100 an acre. So there's a loss of $200 per acre investment, not including the 50 years that it takes to get to the rotation age. So it's a challenge silviculturally to have habitat and then also produce a viable product at the end of its life cycle. So there is a challenge, definitely there. So we're here at a site that has been recently planted just a few minutes ago. You can see the little red pine trees that are growing in the line there. So this particular site is about 500 acres, and it was harvested. And you can see the large trees in the background is the remnants of what the parent stand looked like. And so those trees were harvested, and the hardwood competition was allowed to grow for a couple years, and then a tool that's pulled behind a bulldozer called a roller chopper was used to chop up the competition from the hardwood regeneration that's coming here. And then it was sprayed with a herbicide to try to further knock back the competition so that they can grow good quality red pine here. So the trenches you see are growing in a little bit. They've been here for maybe a year, and the purpose of that trench is to open up the sod layer to get down to bare mineral soil so that the trees have a better opportunity to outcompete what is already growing here. So this is about a 500 acre site, and they started at that far wood line just this morning with a crew of 10 or 12 guys, and they've made it about a half a mile down here. So these guys probably have been here 2 days. They might be finishing up on their second day. So that crew planted about 500 acres in just a few days. The red pine seedlings are planted at a density of 900 trees per acre. So what that means on the ground is that the trenches will be 8 feet apart, and that the trees themselves will be planted at a spacing of 6 feet apart, for a total of 900 trees per acre of the red pine. So this is one of the KW openings that are made, so you can see how the trencher wove around the outside of the opening. And these are 160 feet long by 80 foot wide, and there's about 50 to 60 feet between. They're called diamonds. So the next diamond is about 50 to 60 feet that way of this diamond. And then they will put 12 rows of trees in between the diamonds. So the purpose of these diamonds is the birds nest along the edge, and as the trees start to grow up, there's a definite edge effect between where the open is and where the trees are growing, and that creates kind of its own little microclimate. The birds are ground nesters, so they kind of stick their nest under the pine in the shade, but then they also have access to the openings for bugs and other little critters, invertebrates that they like to eat. During the breeding season, it also gives them a wide open spot to kind of claim as their own and be able to defend and define it a little.